problem together. The mere calling of a summit means that we've all got to act together and come up with practical solutions. We can blame one another, throw stones at one another, but the fact remains is that we've got to protect the women of our country from rape, from abuse, and from the killings that continue. So that should touch everybody's heart, and we should all gear up into action and do as much as we possibly can. What we have sought to create an enabling environment where this matter becomes topical in every forum. We talk about it and we come up with solutions. I was particularly pleased when I was in the Eastern Cape to find that young boys at school are now debating this issue. So the message is spreading, but much more still needs to be done. And we're here to come up with solutions on what to be done.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. President. Of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa joining the many women stakeholders and role players who are starting a two-day summit on gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa. As we know, this remains a huge problem in our society, a grave human right violation, as many women and children in particular remain vulnerable to what, as the President has just reminded us, being a pandemic. We've seen the statistics that are sending shockwaves throughout our country as we observe the level of violence against, in particular, women. If we just think about, the latest statistics that we have seen that, led to outrage throughout the country. We remember those the victims who were raped in Krugersdorp recently. We were also shocked when we saw the bodies of 6 women that were discovered in Johannesburg, children that have been murdered. And this, despite all the promises that have been made, all the efforts that have been put in place, this despite the noise that has been made by so many activists who are demanding a change. We saw the 2018 summit that was supposed to be the foundation of finding solutions, but despite the national strategic plan that was tabled and some of the many solutions that have been brought forward by the activists, by government, those on the ground say that there is still no change. Some say, of course, the COVID-19 lockdown has also reversed some of the gains that were made during the 2018 marches and the first summit that was held. But many saying that implementation remains one of the biggest problems when it comes to the battle against gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa, and that implementation and some of the challenges that continue to set back the efforts that have been made, in particular when you look at what's happening at police stations, when you hear of some of the lack of funding that activists are still talking about, that has actually encouraged for a second summit to take place. And the President here to once again lend an ear to see how exactly can we perhaps amend some of the changes that were brought about, in particular in the National Strategic Plan. How can some of those recommendations be amended? What has worked, what has not worked, and what can be changed for the better? Many of the activists are calling for accountability. They're saying this would definitely make a huge difference when it comes to the battle against gender-based violence.
Well, good morning to you and the viewers at home. Indeed, day one of the Presidential National Summit against Gender-based Violence and Femicide kicks off today. We're inside the conference venue where, of course, this emanates from the August 2018 watershed moment where women from all walks of life and gender non-conforming persons marched across the country to highlight the plight of women and children in South Africa. Now, of course, as we come to the second summit here today, as it kicks off today, it's really about reflecting on the work undertaken since 2018 and providing an opportunity for feedback and accountability, ultimately in a bid to rid this country of the scourge. I want to bring in Sibongile Ndashe, a feminist lawyer, an activist who has been part of this movement and has been here from the very beginning dealing with this scourge in this country, who's going to discuss with us what can we expect from the summit and what exactly are stakeholders gunning for as we sit for 2 days to address the scourge that has continued unabated in this country. Thank you so much for joining us. What are your expectations and what are the main aims of the second summit? We've seen that accountability is a big theme. Is this what stakeholders are looking for regarding from government in this fight against gender-based violence and femicide?
Thank you for having me. So this summit is themed accountability, acceleration, and amplification now. The difference between this and the first summit is that activists of the total shutdown movement asked for that summit. Here, the president asked for this summit. The president says he wants to create a space where there could be accountability, acceleration, and amplification. The way in which the summit is organized, there are 4 spaces for accountability. We are going to have journalists on 2 panels with cabinet ministers and other duty bearers, asking them hard questions on accountability, on what has happened and what has not happened. We are going to break into commissions, and these commissions are planned in accordance with the pillars of the National Strategic Plan. That is the roadmap to the response that was agreed to at the presidential summit, the first one, and then given effect in the National Strategic Plan that was adopted in 2020. We will then move into action caucuses where target groups talk about the way in which the response has or has not improved, their lives and where the gaps are or not. And we will end with the clinics. The clinics are like the way we know clinics, where we are going to diagnose what are some of those things that have gone wrong. And the idea there is that we will move out of the clinics with very clear plans on how to fast track and resolve some of those key challenges. So there are about 12 clinics, and these clinics are really about what the pressing issues are in the response to the National Strategic Plan. So we won't have a lot of speeches. The idea is really that people who have a duty are going to come here and account, and then hopefully we will develop an accountability framework. If this summit is successful in achieving its objectives, it will mean that we don't only have one space to hold government accountable, and that being the courts. It means that this can be a model for other national action plans and other sectors as well, that a space like this can be convened and in real time we'll be able to ask questions and hopefully come up with solutions.
Now, of course, you sat in 2018, an NSP was developed, a declaration was signed. But of course, after that period, some of the most brutal and inhumane murders of women and children have been witnessed in this country. Teko Fatsopule, Uinene Mkhetane, to name a few. Do you feel that this summit will achieve some of the goals that you've set out to eradicate the scourge from the country?
So the National Strategic Plan came in 2020, just right at the beginning of COVID. So in many ways it was overshadowed by what was happening. So we are now at 2.5 years of the National Strategic Plan. As you correctly point out, we don't seem to have made a lot of difference, in terms of responding to some of the causes. So what the National Strategic Plan tells us is that with this roadmap and the 6 pillars, if we are to implement them correctly, then hopefully we'll emerge with a solution. And the diagnosis that we are doing here is basically to say, have we put those systems in place that will enable us?
All right, thank you so much, Sibongile Ndashe there, just joining us ahead of the first day of the Presidential Summit against gender-based violence and femicide. It's clear that there is a lot of work that needs to be done to eradicate the scourge. SABC News will be giving you those stakeholder engagements live as they start today from about 10 a.m. Over to you in studio.